Hi. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you've never been here before. Today, I thought that we would just sit down and talk about all the books that I could think of off the top of my head that I've read that center around what it's like being a girl in not a nonfiction way. All right, so this isn't like nonfiction reads. It's not going to be super in depth. It's mainly literary fiction books that I really relate to, or that I feel like replicate the female girl experience very well, and in many different ways, shapes, and forms. So if you're a girl and you want to feel validated in your feelings, watch this video for some good book recommendations. Or if you're not a girl and you want to know what it's like being a girl and what it is that we go through, read these books. Let's just go ahead and jump right into them. Now, I don't have all of the books physically in my hands. I only have about 3 that I personally own. So this is your reminder to support your local library, because a majority of these books I got through my local library. There's an app called Libby and you can get ebooks on there, get them sent to your phone, get it on your Kindle, whatever it may be. Phone I find is the easiest instead of going on social media, because I don't have any social media besides YouTube, obviously. So once again, check out your local library. Library card's free. Reading books is free. If you want a video about that, let me know. We're gonna start off with the first book, Mary, An Awakening of Terror. Now, I'm not gonna say every book on here is like a 5-star, because that's just simply not true, but majority of the books on here are at least above a 3-star. There's only maybe like 1 or 2 books on here that I wasn't particularly keen on, but Mary is one that I am pretty keen on. All right, so it's a literary fiction horror book. So this one leans a little more horror. It doesn't really start to get super spooky and weird until like the last third of the book. So this book is by Nat Cassidy, and it's about this middle-aged woman named Mary who starts to notice that things are slowly changing in her body. Her doctor says it's menopause, but she doesn't believe it to be menopause. She starts to hear voices in her head, and she goes to visit her aunt's small town, and everything that she's been feeling starts to kind of realize itself in a physical way. So that's all I can really say about it. I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but basically even the premise that's off of Storygraph, that's the app I use to track all my books, everything I'm reading, but even the premise and the plot that's written on Storygraph kind of gives away a little bit. So all I'll say is that this book it's not for the faint of heart, okay? I will say it's not like super gory and bad. I mean, it does get pretty gory and weird. It's more weird than gory, but this kind of replicates the female experience, which I can't really say I have personally experienced, because this follows a middle-aged woman and I'm not middle-aged. But a lot of the going to the doctor, trying to figure out what this thing is, and like no one really taking her seriously because of her age, because she's a woman, like things like that is something pretty much all women can relate to. So it's just all the fears of being a woman, growing older, the stigma about being older, all of that kind of like gets crumbled up into a big ball, and it's just tumbling down this hill, and Mary just can't seem to stop it, and it just starts to get worse and worse and worse until finally something clicks in her head and pops off. So like I said, she hears voices in her head. You know, that's not really a normal thing, no matter what your gender is, and shit starts to go down when she goes back to this small town. So I gave this book 4 stars. I really liked it. Very spooky. Like I said, not for the faint of heart, but it's not too bad, I would say. If you're sensitive to, or I guess if you just don't want to read books about like serial killers, and I think that's pretty much the main thing. I mean, it is a pretty gory book, but I'd say it's more weird than gory or scary. So that's my first recommendation. Okay, the next one is a more recent read, and it is called The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. So this one is about this young girl named Ji Won, and she is kind of dealing with the aftermath of her father recently leaving her mother and her mother's depression in this. And all the stressors in Ji Won's life is just coming to fruition when her mom gets this new boyfriend, George, the brightest blue eyes she's ever seen in her entire life. And he kind of has some weird fetish for like Asian women, and it just starts to really piss her off seeing how he's taking advantage of the mom. So she starts to grow this obsession not only for like him, but for like blue eyes in general. And that's all I can really say. But not even just like, she doesn't even start to grow like a fascination for blue eyes in general. She starts to grow like a hunger for them. So I think you can kind of see where I'm going with this. This book was such an easy, nice read. I was always interested in picking it up. I didn't really want to put it down, and chapters are short, which we love, love, love. And because of that, it made it like a fast and easy read. I gave this one 4 stars as well. I really enjoyed it. I think the ending, I wasn't really sure how I felt about it, but I think this really captures what it's like being a girl and having all this rage inside of you. I guess I will say, I will not elaborate on that, but I think something that's interesting to point out too is it also kind of shows like, yes, it is kind of overly comical and like over exaggerated, the men in her life and how bad they are. It's kind of over exaggerated, but it does do a good job of replicating like how it feels to a girl. Although not all men are like this, sometimes it feels like it, especially when you already have all this rage built up inside of you, which she does considering her dad left her mom. And also she has a younger sister that she kind of feels like she is like a second mom to, that she has to look out for. And it's a really good book to kind of show you the aftermath of, you know, a woman scorned, I guess I should say. Okay, this next book is one of the books that I was telling you about that I'm not too keen on. Actually don't really like it very much, but a lot of people do like it, so I'm gonna recommend it either way because I feel like people can still get a kick out of this one. And it is Dogs of Summer by Andrea Abreu. So I don't even really know how to tell you what the blurb of this is. So it's about these 2 young girls. It's 2005 and basically about their friendship. And I think it does really reflect female friendship accurately in some ways, all right? Because it's also about like one of the girls specifically kind of not really knowing if she likes her best friend in like a romantic way or in like a friendship way. And she's kind of grappling with that a little bit, but a little bit. It doesn't really go into the characters very much. It's very much like this happened and then this happened and then this happened. It's not a whole lot of like personal development, I guess I will say. There's not a whole lot of plot in general going on. So if that's something that you're looking for, you're not really gonna get it with this. Like nothing really happens until maybe like the last like chapter basically. But I think what it does show very well is like the female friendship of, you always have that one friend that's everybody loves them or they're just easy to get along with, and maybe that's not you particularly. Like that's something that every once in a while like a female friendship can kind of accumulate itself in that way. So I think it really does show that part very well. I will say if you're sensitive to POOP, do not read this book. Oh my god, the amount of times they talk about it in this book is aggressive. They talk about it a lot. They talk about just like gross and nasty things, and that's why I, one, don't really highly recommend it. But if you want to learn a little bit more about like female friendships and stuff like that, then I think this is a decent read. But 2, it's just gross. I don't want to read about like POOP. It's not even just like once a one-off thing. It happens frequently. All right, there's so much talk about that and like throwing up. Yeah, if you read the blurb on this, they even talk about the POP in this, and it's a lot, all right? It's a lot. This is also not for the faint of heart. And I only say that because it's like gross. All right, next is a book that's kind of similar to this, but maybe not as gross and nasty. It is Chlorine by Jade Song. This one is about a high schooler who is like a varsity swimmer. She's on the swim team. She's very good. She's like the best swimmer that they've got on the team. But she starts to kind of grow this like depression around all this pressure from her coach of like her being the best on the team, that she starts to like weirdly think that she's a mermaid for some reason. And she starts to grow this fascination with mermaids and water. It kind of just snowballs from there. But I don't even think this is like very specific to being a girl. But what is specific to being a girl is there's a kind of a lot of scenes like where this whole like pressure stems from. Is this one scene, it's at the very beginning of the book, where there's like a really big meet and she starts her period. She's in a lot of pain, like obviously she has cramps and she's just in a lot of physical pain, but it's like at the meet. She can't back out now. So that kind of is something like girls can kind of relate to, I feel like, as well. Even if you're in pain or you're suffering in any way, shape, or form, physical or not, you're still kind of expected to do your job, perform in any way. And that's something that I think this book really replicates very well to the audience. Book takes a very obvious but odd turn, shows female friendship in a unique way as well. So again, if you're interested in something like that, this is kind of described as like a horror, which it is pretty scary towards like the end, but it's a little unrealistic. So it's not my favorite book to recommend, but I do think the whole cliche saying of to be a woman is to perform, that's kind of what this book shows and replicates very well. Okay, the next book is one that I actually have the physical form of, and that is Nightbitch by Rachel Yoder. So this is actually becoming a movie soon. I don't really know exactly when it'll come out. I think it's like next month is when this movie is going to come out. But this is about a new mom who kind of takes on the stay-at-home mom role, and she's finding it very, very difficult. Okay, her husband's away on business trips very often, and she is a new mom. She's kind of dealing with this all by herself, it feels like, and she starts to just feel a lot of outside pressure from like mommy groups and women who seem to have it all together. And through all of this, she starts to grow patches of hair, and she starts to believe that she's becoming a dog. Like actually a dog though. So this is kind of described as like a horror as well. It's more odd than horrifying, and that's very subjective, I believe, but I will say it's more odd than horror because this, I feel like, reflects motherhood in a very accurate way. Again, I'm not a mom, but I feel like the aspect of having this pressure of being a woman, or you gotta seem like you have it all together, especially if you're kind of feeling like you're doing this on your own, like your husband's gone, he's doing this, this, and that. That pressure is something that I feel like a lot of women can relate to, unfortunately. So this book, and I hope that the movie will be able to show this and reflect this accurately. The movie has Amy Adams starring as our protagonist, but I hope that they don't hold back because this book was very odd. And I will say it's a long process to get there. It's not a fast-paced book. It's really not. I mean, not to say this is a long book, it's not even 300 pages. It's probably like, yeah, it's 238 pages. It's not the biggest book. However, sometimes I kind of felt like there was slow points in order to get to, you know, the parts where she thinks that she's a dog. It takes a while to get there. A lot of it is her feelings about being a mother and all that. So, which I have another video idea with this book in mind. Okay, the next one is one that I also read pretty recently, and that is Motherthing by, I actually don't know how to pronounce this author's name. I'll put it on the screen because I'm gonna butcher it in any way, shape, and form. But this book was so freaking good. So let me tell you the premise of it. So it's basically about this couple, mainly following our protagonist, who her husband recently lost his mother. They were living with her, they were taking care of his mom. She recently passes away, but they never really had a good relationship. You know, the wife and the mother-in-law, they didn't have a very good relationship. So her passing is making, you know, the wife feel some type of way about it. And she believes she is being haunted by her mother-in-law. So that's the basic premise of this book. However, it's not even entirely about that. If anything, I feel like this is about her specifically, like the wife, the protagonist. It's about her specifically, but more often it's more about how she feels about her husband and the love that she has for him. And a lot of it I felt like I could relate to. It's very, very poetic. There's so many quotes that I got from this. The writing in this is impeccable. All right. I think I gave this like a 4 or a 4.5. Something was holding me back from giving it a 5-star. I think because the premise kind of makes it seem like it's about being haunted by your mother-in-law and it was gonna be spooky, but it was just really, really sad. Again, you know, this is just your warning right here and now. This book is very sad. At least I thought it was very sad because our main character is very depressed and her husband, who just recently lost their mom, is also very depressed as well, and she doesn't really know how to be there for him. It's very difficult to watch. It feels very relatable though. If not to you, then I feel like everyone knows someone that is going through something like this or has gone through something like this. So take care of yourself when you're reading this because this was a very depressing book, but so good, so worth it. Like, I'm still so glad that I read it though. Okay, the next one is another book that I actually have the physical copy of, and that is The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. Not sure how to pronounce his last name. But this is about the 5 Lisbon sisters. This is told from the perspective these boys that kind of just like admired them from afar. So 4 stars for that. This is about the 5 Lisbon sisters. They're just kind of like these ethereal, kind of like perfectly out of reach, perfect 5 sisters that are just kind of infamous throughout the town, but they all kind of have their own very specific, very unique personalities. I don't know, everyone kind of has some sort of fawning for each one of the sisters, right? But one by one, they start unaliving themselves. This book is not for the faint of heart. It's very sad. These boys are very transfixed on why they did what they did. They're kind of reflecting on this time in their lives from an older age. So it's told from the perspective of like boys, like I said, who kind of admire them from the far, and they're older and they're looking back on this time in their life. And this is a movie. I have not seen the movie yet, so I'm very curious to see how this was adapted in film, mainly because it has Kirsten Dunst in it and I love her, so I want to see how this is. But something that I didn't really like was one, I don't know how I feel about it being told from like these older guys' perspective. I thought that was kind of odd, and I understand it not being told from the Lisbon sisters' perspective because then that would just be giving too much away. You know, when someone unalives themselves, you don't really know why. So I understand why it wasn't told from that perspective, right? From the sister's perspective, because when you're on the outside looking in, you just don't know why someone did what they did. This one quote though, I think summarizes how I feel about the book and summarizes the book in general and like the main themes that I got from it. But one of the sisters, one of the very young sisters, I think she's like 10 or something. 13. Okay, she's 13. So she tries to unalive herself and she gets caught before anything too drastic can happen. She gets to the hospital and the doctor says, "What are you doing here? You're not even old enough to know how bad life gets." And it was then Cecilia gave orally what was to be her only form of a suicide note, and a useless one at that, because she was going to live. "Obviously, doctor," she said, "you've never been a 13-year-old girl. Like, tattoo that on my body. Tattoo that on my forehead." That's all I have to say about that. You have to read that book. Okay, next is something I would deem a classic, and that is Carrie by Stephen King. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't too fond of this book. It's very, very short, but I hated how it was formatted. It jumps back between narratives of Carrie and then Sue Snell or whatever, like the girl that kind of helped her out, whatever. Sue's perspective as an adult, her like autobiography, and then newspaper clippings, and then police recordings, and it's a mess, right? I wish it was all just from Carrie's perspective or all from Sue's perspective or whatever. But I mean, I'll explain the premise briefly. I'm pretty sure most of us will know what the story of Carrie is. But It's about teenage Carrie who's bullied relentlessly, very harshly for most of her life. And she starts to notice eventually, once all this rage is built up, that she has telekinesis. So shit starts to pop off. It's a horror. And there's a lot of iconic moments in this. The book is very different from the movie, I will say, but I kind of like the movie a little bit more. That's a whole nother video in and of itself though. But unfortunately, I didn't like this book, but something I do think this book reflects very well is having a different opinion than your mom. All right, your mom wants to raise you one way, you don't want to be raised that way. Carrie and her mom are at head a lot. They're clashing a lot. And it's very difficult to watch, especially seeing how the mom babies Carrie, even though she's like 17. It's really difficult. I did appreciate the different perspective of neighbors or classmates or whoever seeing the mom treat Carrie like from afar, and they're like, that is so sad. Like they look back on it and they think that is so sad. And that's something that I think a lot of girls will relate to, of going head to head with their mom and not agreeing with a lot of what their mom says. So I think that's something that is shown really, really well in this book. Okay, the next book is very similar to like the Virgin Suicides, but that is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Another classic, and something, I mean, there's not really like a whole plot to this book either, I will say, but to kind of give you a summary, it's about this young girl named Esther. She's an intern for a fashion magazine. It's like the 50s, and she seems to have everything that like a woman is supposed to have in the 50s, right? Like she has a job, she has a career, she has like prospects of, you know, potential boyfriends, if you, I guess you will say. And it's the perfect example of like you could have everything going for you and still be depressed. And that's what happened. Esther is very depressed and she tries to unalive herself, and it's kind of grappling with like her mindset of that. This has the classic and beautiful fig tree metaphor, fig tree paragraph, line, quote, whatever you want to call it, of Esther kind of grappling. She's like, I imagine myself sitting under a fig tree, and there's all these different branches and figs of all these different lives I could have lived if I did this differently, if I did that differently. I could pick this fig, that one. But I got so overwhelmed with all the different options that I ended up picking none of them. Hence her trying to unalive herself. I don't even think that experience is specifically something females only can relate to. I think that's something a lot of people can relate to, but I think the way it's told through the female lens is very, very poetic. I really, really loved this book. I gave this book 5 stars. For the longest time, I didn't give it any rating, and I just kept thinking more and more about it, and I was like, you know what? Who are we kidding? This is a 5-star book. I highly, highly recommend it. Okay, the next book is another book that I actually have the physical copy of, and that is the Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood. Listen, Margaret Atwood is my girly. All right, I read The Handmaid's Tale about 2 years ago, and I've been obsessed with this girl ever since. I have read her poetry collection, which I feel like I'm gonna make a whole different video about poetry in and of itself, but this girl knows how to write, okay? This is a Greek mythology retelling of Penelope, who is the wife of Odysseus, and she's also the cousin of Helen of Troy. So this takes place during the time where Odysseus is out fighting in the Trojan War, and Penelope is at home waiting for him to come back from war. In Greek mythology, Penelope, Odysseus's wife, is kind of depicted as someone who's perfect because she stayed home and waited for her husband, had all these men fawning after her that was like, Odysseus is probably dead, so like, let's get together. And she was like, no, 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 my husband's coming back. I know he's coming back. And he did. But this is a retelling because it's kind of reflecting on like, well, let's think if I was in that situation, how would it actually be though? How would it actually be being in this situation, not knowing if your husband was gonna come back, and then all these men are lined up being like, he's probably dead, so like, who gives a fuck? And it's just, you know, very sad and depressing. It shows kind of the realities of what like probably happened, I will say. We're not gonna say it's a fact because we don't know the fact. It's not Greek mythological times anymore. We don't know what actually happened in Penelope's mind. But we can imagine that it was very difficult difficult for her to wait for Odysseus to come back, not getting any updates, no tree mail, no bird, messengers, nothing, all right? No messages in a bottle, nothing. There was no way for her to communicate with him directly. So it was probably really difficult for her to be at home waiting for him and to have this hope and to just, sit there and be kind of oblivious and try to talk herself out of these terrible, sad times. So I think it reflects that part of being a woman, of like holding out hope for someone and you don't even know if it's worth it, basically, like not to be morbid, but that's how it was for her. It's kind of placing a realistic lens on this Greek story, this ancient Greek story. Okay, and the last book that I'm going to be talking about is Elsewhere by this author. I'm not going to pronounce their last name because I feel like I'm going to butcher it. It's on the screen. So this book is very odd. I don't even know if I would say thrillery. It's speculative dystopian fiction, right? So it's about this girl named Vera who grows up in this very small town, and when she was very young, her mother left her father, or so it seems. But it seems to be a common trend with the mothers in this town. Every couple months, a mother leaves the father, and in order to like be rid of the mom, they burn all of the mom's stuff. All the pictures, any memory, anything that they can have of this mom, they burn it. They're like, "Okay, bye, we're removing you completely." And then the town completely forgets about that mom altogether. It's about being a girl, but it's also about motherhood, because Vera finds herself fearing for this when she grows up. She was like, am I gonna be removed? Like, what happens? Like, why do these moms leave? It's never like answered why these moms leave, but you pick it up as Vera grows older, why these moms leave. So it's very female centered. There's so much to dissect with this book. I really appreciate it because it was a weird way of showing us how difficult motherhood is for some people, right? And basically how, although this is like a dystopian type of book, how women can be like kind of chastised, and pushed out of people's lives and humiliated for kind of being like, motherhood is really hard, and people are like pushing you out of it, burning your pictures, like in a very aggressive way, but I think it reflects it really, really well. So those are all the books I could think of off the top of my head that I feel like reflect what it's like being a girl and all that jazz and the difficulties that coincide with that. So I want to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons, but especially Mark Sylvester, James Cox, and E. Thank you so much, and make sure to go ahead and check out my Patreon if you haven't already. Okay, if you have any other suggestions for some book ideas, book recommendations, if you have any like niche book recommendations that you want to give me, or some kind of like niche topics that you want me to give you a recommendation for, let me know. I'd be more than happy to make a video about that. Just any book ideas you got, throw them my way. But thank you guys for coming along with me on this journey. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all of that jazz, and as always, thanks for watching.